July 23, 1983, 8:48 p.m. Central Time, 41,000 feet above Red Lake, Ontario. Captain Bob Pearson is flying Air Canada Flight 143, a brand new Boeing 767 on a routine flight from Montreal to Edmonton with a stopover in Ottawa. It's a beautiful summer evening, clear skies, light traffic, 61 passengers on board, most of them relaxed after dinner service, reading magazines or dozing. The 767 is the most advanced airliner in the sky. Two Pratt & Whitney turbofan engines generating 48,000 pounds of thrust each, glass cockpit with digital displays instead of analog gauges, computerized fuel management, the cutting edge of aviation technology in 1983. Pearson is 48 years old, a veteran pilot with over 15,000 flight hours. His first officer, Maurice Quintal, has 7,000 hours. They're experienced, competent, flying an aircraft so new the airline is still working out operational procedures. Everything is routine until the cockpit starts beeping. At 8:48 p.m., a warning chime sounds. Pearson glances at the instrument panel. A fuel pressure warning light has illuminated on the left engine. That's unusual, but not alarming. Fuel pump failures happen. The aircraft has redundant systems. The left engine is still running normally. Pearson reaches for the checklist. Before he can open it, another warning sounds. The right engine fuel pressure warning. Now both engines are showing fuel pressure problems. That shouldn't be possible. The 767 has multiple fuel pumps, multiple systems. Losing pressure in both engines simultaneously suggests something catastrophic. Then, at 8:49 p.m., the left engine fails. Not sputters, not struggles, just stops. The turbine winds down, the thrust drops to zero. The aircraft is now flying on one engine at 41,000 feet with 61 passengers on board. Pearson's hand moves toward the engine restart controls. Before he reaches them, at 8:50 p.m., the right engine quits. Complete silence. No engine noise, no thrust, no power generation. A 132-ton Boeing 767 is now a glider at 41,000 feet, 120 miles from the nearest suitable airport, with both engines dead and every warning light in the cockpit illuminated. In the cabin, passengers hear the engines die. The background roar they've lived with for the past hour simply stops. It's replaced by an eerie whistling sound, wind rushing past the fuselage as the aircraft glides through the sky. Several passengers who are pilots themselves immediately know what's happened. Commercial jets don't glide well. They're optimized for powered flight. Without engines, a 767 has a glide ratio of about 12:1. For every mile of altitude, it can glide forward about 12 miles before hitting the ground. From 41,000 feet, that gives them approximately 90 miles, maybe 25 minutes. The nearest airport is Winnipeg, 120 miles away. They can't make it. Mathematically impossible. Captain Pearson does the calculation in his head and reaches the same conclusion. They need an airport within 90 miles, and they need it now. What he doesn't know yet is that the reason both engines failed is because Flight 143 has run completely out of fuel. What he doesn't know is that a series of cascading errors, a broken fuel gauge, a metric to imperial conversion mistake, and a procedural oversight has left his aircraft with approximately 20,000 pounds of fuel when it needs 45,000 to reach Edmonton. And what he doesn't know is that in about 23 minutes, he's going to attempt a landing that's never been done before, putting a fully loaded Boeing 767 on a decommissioned military runway that's being used as a drag racing strip in front of families having a weekend barbecue with no engines, minimal hydraulics, and no margin for error. This is the story of the Gimli Glider, the story of how a simple math mistake nearly killed 69 people, and how a captain who happened to be an expert glider pilot pulled off the most remarkable dead-stick landing in aviation history. To understand how Flight 143 ran out of fuel, you have to understand the chaos of Canada's transition to the metric system in the early 1980s. Canada officially adopted the metric system in 1970. By 1983, most industries had converted. Road signs were in kilometers, gas stations sold liters, weather reports used Celsius, but aviation was messy. Some airlines had converted, some hadn't. Some aircraft used metric, some used imperial. The transition period was a disaster waiting to happen. Air Canada's new Boeing 767s were the airline's first aircraft with metric fuel gauges. Fuel was measured in kilograms instead of pounds. This shouldn't have been a problem. Pilots just needed to learn the new system. But the 767 was so new that operational procedures were still being developed. Training was incomplete, checklists were ambiguous. And on July 23, 1983, the fuel quantity processor on CGAUN, the aircraft operating Flight 143, was broken. The fuel quantity processor is the computer that measures how much fuel is in the tanks and displays it on cockpit gauges. Without it, pilots have to calculate fuel manually using dipsticks, physical measurements taken by sticking a rod into the fuel tank and reading the depth. This is exactly what happened in Montreal before Flight 143 departed. Ground crew used dipsticks to measure the fuel. They got a reading, but then they had to convert that reading into weight. The dipstick measures volume, liters, but fuel in aircraft is calculated by weight, kilograms or pounds, because fuel density changes with temperature. Here's where the error happened. The ground crew knew there were 7,682 liters of fuel remaining in the tanks from the previous flight. They needed to add enough fuel to total 22,300 kilograms for the flight to Edmonton. To convert liters to kilograms, you multiply by the fuel's specific gravity, approximately 0.803 kilograms per liter. But someone used the wrong conversion factor. Instead of using 0.803, they used 1.77 pounds per liter, imperial. This is catastrophically wrong. Using 1.77 instead of 0.803 means you're calculating weight that's more than double what it actually is. The ground crew calculated that the 7,682 liters already in the tanks weighed 13,597 kilograms. In reality, it weighed only 6,169 kilograms. They then calculated how much fuel to add. They added fuel until they thought they had 22,300 kilograms total. In reality, they had only 11,430 kilograms, about half what they needed. Flight 143 departed Montreal with less than half the required fuel. No one noticed because the fuel gauge was broken and the manual calculations were wrong. The flight from Montreal to Ottawa was fine. Short hop, minimal fuel burn. In Ottawa, more fuel was added using the same flawed conversion factor. The error compounded. When Flight 143 departed Ottawa for Edmonton, it had approximately 11,430 kilograms. The flight required about 22,000 kilograms. They were missing nearly half their fuel load. No alarm sounded, no warning light illuminated. The pilots had no indication anything was wrong because the fuel quantity processor, the system that would have caught this, was broken. For the first hour of flight, everything seemed normal. The engines burned fuel at the expected rate, the aircraft climbed to 41,000 feet and cruised at 470 knots. But fuel burns at a predictable rate. With half the fuel they needed, Flight 143 was going to run dry long before reaching Edmonton. At 8:48 p.m., with the aircraft over Red Lake, Ontario, the fuel tanks ran dry. The fuel pressure warnings triggered. 90 seconds later, both engines quit. A simple math error, using 1.77 instead of 0.803, had just turned a routine domestic flight into a potential disaster. When both engines quit, Captain Pearson's first reaction is disbelief.
Commercial jets don't just lose both engines. It doesn't happen. Engines are reliable. Redundant systems prevent simultaneous failures. Losing one engine is rare, but manageable. Losing both is a scenario pilots train for in simulators, but never expect to encounter. Pearson keys his radio to Winnipeg Air Traffic Control. Flight 143, we've lost both engines, declaring an emergency. In the cabin, flight attendants try to keep passengers calm, but it's impossible to hide what's happening. The engines are dead. The aircraft is descending. People who've never prayed in their lives start praying. Pearson runs through the emergency checklist for engine restart. The procedure is simple. Adjust fuel flow, attempt ignition, wait for the engine to spool up. Nothing happens. The engines won't restart because there's no fuel. The pilots don't know this yet. They assume fuel pump failures or electrical problems, but the result is the same. The engines are dead and won't restart. First Officer Maurice Quintal pulls out charts and starts calculating. Where's the nearest airport? How far can they glide? What are their options? Winnipeg International is 120 miles away. The math says they can't make it. Quintal scans the chart for alternatives. There's an airport at Gimli, about 45 miles ahead. It's a small regional airport, but it has a 6,800-foot runway, long enough for a 767 if they can reach it. Gimli, Quintal says. We can make Gimli. Pearson nods. Gimli is their only option. What neither pilot knows is that Gimli Airport is no longer an active airport. It was decommissioned as a commercial facility in 1971. The main runway, runway 32L, is still there, but it's been converted to a drag racing strip. And on this particular Saturday evening, the Winnipeg Sports Car Club is hosting a race event, with families barbecuing and children playing near the runway. But even if Pearson knew this, it wouldn't matter. Gimli is the only runway within gliding distance. It's Gimli or a crash landing in the Canadian wilderness. He turns the aircraft toward Gimli and begins the descent. Flying a 767 as a glider is nothing like flying a normal airplane. The aircraft is heavy, 132 tons, and it wants to fall. The glide ratio is terrible compared to actual gliders. Every decision about speed and altitude must be perfect because there's no second chance. If Pearson descends too steeply, they'll hit the ground short of the runway. If he descends too shallowly, trying to stretch the glide, the aircraft will stall, lose lift, and drop like a brick. He has one attempt to get this right. Pearson happens to have one critical advantage. He's an experienced glider pilot. In his free time, he flies sailplanes for recreation. He understands energy management in unpowered flight better than almost any commercial airline pilot alive. This is the luckiest coincidence in the entire disaster. Of all the pilots who could be flying a 767 when both engines quit, Bob Pearson is one of maybe a handful who has the skills to land it. He sets up for a glide approach to Gimli. Airspeed 220 knots, descent rate 2,000 feet per minute. He's trading altitude for distance, trying to stretch every mile out of the glide. But there's another problem developing. With both engines dead, the aircraft has lost its primary electrical generators. The 767 has a ram air turbine, a small emergency propeller that deploys into the airstream to generate backup power, but it doesn't provide full electrical capacity. The hydraulics are failing. Hydraulics control the flight surfaces, ailerons, elevators, rudder. Without hydraulics, the aircraft becomes almost unflyable. The controls get stiff. Inputs require enormous physical force. Pearson and Quintal are both pulling on the yoke, using all their strength to make control inputs. The aircraft is responding sluggishly. This is like trying to steer a car with no power steering. Every turn requires muscle. And they're descending through 25,000 feet, still 60 miles from Gimli.
Air traffic control has cleared the airspace around Gimli. Every aircraft in southern Manitoba is being diverted.
Emergency vehicles are being scrambled, but no one has informed the people at Gimli Airport that a commercial airliner is about to attempt an emergency landing on their drag strip. The Winnipeg Sports Car Club is in the middle of their Saturday evening races. About 100 people are at the airport, racers, families, spectators. Children are playing near the runway. Race cars are lined up. Someone is grilling hot dogs. They have no idea what's about to happen. At 9:05 p.m., Flight 143 descends through 10,000 feet. Pearson can see Gimli Airport ahead, a gray strip against green farmland. It looks impossibly small. The 767 is huge, the runway is tiny, and they're coming in fast with no engines and minimal control. Quintal is reading out altitude and speed. 8,000 feet, speed 240 knots. We're high. They're high. This is good and bad. Good because it means they'll reach the runway. Bad because they need to lose altitude quickly without overshooting. In a normal aircraft, pilots use multiple methods to lose altitude: reduce power, deploy speed brakes, extend landing gear. Flight 143 has no power to reduce. The speed brakes are partially functional, but limited due to hydraulic failures. The landing gear is a problem. The 767's landing gear is hydraulically operated. With limited hydraulics, extending the gear might use up the remaining hydraulic pressure needed for flight. If they extend the gear too early and lose hydraulic pressure, the aircraft becomes unflyable. Pearson decides to wait. He'll extend the gear at the last possible moment. He performs a maneuver called a forward slip, a technique glider pilots use to lose altitude without gaining speed. He banks the aircraft and applies opposite rudder. This creates drag and steepens the descent without accelerating. The 767 descends at an angle no commercial jets should ever fly. Passengers in the cabin are gripping armrests, praying, saying goodbye to loved ones. Through 5,000 feet, the runway is clearly visible now. So are the cars, and the people, and the kids playing on the edge of the strip. At the drag racing event, someone looks up and sees the aircraft. At first, they don't understand what they're seeing. A 767? Here? No engines running? Then reality hits. That plane is landing on this runway right now. People start running. Parents grab children. Race crews scramble. Someone is yelling to clear the runway. A family is having a picnic on the grass adjacent to the runway. The father looks up, sees the aircraft descending directly toward them, no engine noise, just the whistle of air, and grabs his kids, sprinting away from the strip. Two boys riding bicycles on the decommissioned runway see the aircraft and freeze. They're directly in the landing path. Someone screams at them to move. They drop their bikes and run. Pearson doesn't know any of this is happening. From his perspective, the runway looks clear. He has no idea there are people down there. At 1,000 feet, he extends the landing gear. The nose gear comes down and locks. The main landing gear deploys, but only the right main gear locks into position. The left main gear is down, but not locked. It might collapse on touchdown. There's no time to troubleshoot. Pearson is committed to landing. At 500 feet, traveling at 180 knots with no engines, minimal hydraulics, and one unsecured landing gear, Flight 143 crosses the runway threshold. Then, Pearson sees what's actually on the runway. People, cars, barriers. This isn't an active runway, it's a drag strip with an event in progress. He has approximately 3 seconds to decide abort and try to overshoot or commit to landing on a runway full of obstacles. There's no fuel to overshoot, no engines to power a go-around. They're landing here, now, whatever is on the runway. Pearson commits.
Flight 143 crosses the threshold of runway 32L at 9:08 p.m., traveling at 180 knots, about 205 miles per hour. For reference, a normal 767 landing speed is around 140 knots. Flight 143 is coming in 40 knots too fast because Pearson needs the extra speed to maintain control without engines. The aircraft touches down hard. The right main gear hits first, fully locked and supporting the weight. The left main gear hits and immediately starts to collapse. The unsecured gear can't handle the landing forces. It folds partially, causing the left wing to dip toward the runway. The nose gear touches down. Pearson applies the brakes. Without engine power, the braking system is operating on backup hydraulics only. The brakes are weak. The aircraft is decelerating, but not quickly enough. Ahead on the runway, barriers and equipment from the drag racing event are scattered across the surface. Pearson can see them clearly now. People are running. A race car is still on the strip. The aircraft is going to hit something. The partially collapsed left landing gear is creating sparks. The left engine nacelle, the housing around the engine, is scraping the runway, throwing up a shower of metal and fragments. The friction is creating heat. If there were any fuel in the tanks, the sparks could ignite a fire. Fortunately, the tanks are completely empty. The nose gear hits a small concrete divider that separates the active racing strip from the decommissioned section. The impact blows both nose tires. The aircraft is now sliding on bare rims, braking effectiveness reduced to almost nothing. Pearson stands on the brakes with all his weight. Quintal is pulling the emergency brake handle. The aircraft is decelerating but still traveling at 60 knots with barriers ahead. In the cabin, passengers are in brace position, heads down, waiting for impact. Several people are screaming. The flight attendants are shouting, "Brace! Brace! Brace!" The left wing nacelle continues scraping the runway. The noise is incredible, metal grinding on concrete at high speed. At approximately 1,500 feet down the runway, Flight 143 finally stops. The nose is tilted down because of the blown tires. The left wing is sagging from the collapsed gear. Smoke is rising from the left nacelle, but the aircraft is intact. No fire, no structural failure. For a moment, there's complete silence in the cockpit. Then Pearson keys the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, sorry for the rough landing. Please evacuate the aircraft immediately using the emergency slides." In the cabin, passengers are already moving. The flight attendants open the emergency exits. The evacuation slides deploy, though some don't inflate properly due to hydraulic failures. Passengers jump from the exits onto the runway. Outside, the people from the drag racing event are running toward the aircraft. They've just watched a commercial airliner perform a dead stick landing on their race strip. Some are helping passengers evacuate. Others are standing in shock, unable to process what they've witnessed. Emergency vehicles arrive within minutes. Fire crews spray foam on the hot engine nacelle to prevent any fire risk. Paramedics check passengers for injuries. Miraculously, there were no serious injuries. A few passengers have minor cuts and bruises from the evacuation. One flight attendant twisted an ankle. That's it. 69 people were on board Flight 143. All 69 survived. Captain Bob Pearson has just completed the first successful dead stick landing of a commercial airliner with all passengers surviving. The aircraft will be repaired and returned to service. It will fly for Air Canada until 2008, 25 more years, eventually being retired and scrapped. But the story of what happened on July 23, 1983 will become legend. The investigation into Flight 143 began immediately. The Canadian Aviation Safety Board wanted answers. How does a modern airliner run completely out of fuel in flight? The investigation uncovered a cascade of errors, organizational, technical, and human, that combined to create the disaster. Error 1. The fuel quantity processor. The fuel gauge system on CGAUN was known to be malfunctioning. The Minimum Equipment List, MEL, allowed the aircraft to fly with the gauge inoperative if pilots calculated fuel manually. This was legal, but required strict adherence to procedures. Error 2. The conversion factor. Ground crew used the wrong conversion factor when calculating fuel weight. They used 1.77 pounds per liter, the density for jet fuel at standard conditions, in imperial units, instead of 0.803 kilograms per liter, the metric equivalent. This happened multiple times in Montreal and Ottawa, compounding the error. Error 3. Inadequate training.
Air Canada's training program for the 767 didn't adequately cover metric fuel calculations. Pilots and ground crew were transitioning from imperial to metric without clear procedures. The ambiguity led to confusion. Error 4. Procedural oversight. Multiple people should have caught the error. The ground crew, the pilots, the refueling supervisor each had opportunities to notice the fuel load was wrong. But because everyone trusted the calculations, no one double-checked. Error 5. The broken gauge. If the fuel quantity processor had been working, it would have immediately shown that the aircraft was critically low on fuel. The broken gauge masked the error until the engines flamed out. The investigation concluded that Flight 143 ran out of fuel due to a series of human errors in calculation and communication, compounded by inadequate procedures during Canada's transition to metric measurement. No single person was entirely at fault. The ground crew made the calculation error, but they were following ambiguous procedures. The pilots should have caught it, but they trusted the refueling team. The airline should have clearer protocols, but the industry was in transition. The official findings led to immediate changes. Mandatory dual checking of manual fuel calculations, improved training on metric conversions, clearer MEL procedures for flying with inoperative fuel gauges, enhanced cockpit automation to prevent similar errors. Captain Pearson and First Officer Quintal were initially blamed by some media outlets for not catching the fuel error, but the aviation community recognized what they'd accomplished. They'd saved 69 lives with skill, quick thinking, and Pearson's glider expertise. Both pilots were awarded the first-ever Federation Aeronautical International Diploma for outstanding airmanship. Pearson received numerous aviation safety awards. The industry recognized the landing as one of the most impressive feats of piloting in commercial aviation history.
The most remarkable aspect of the Gimli Glider incident is Bob Pearson's background. Pearson wasn't just a commercial airline pilot, he was a serious glider pilot who flew sailplanes competitively in his free time. He understood energy management, glide ratios, and unpowered landings better than almost anyone in commercial aviation. Gliding is all about energy conservation. You have potential energy, altitude, and kinetic energy, speed. You trade one for the other. Too fast and you waste altitude descending too quickly. Too slow, then you stall. Commercial pilots are trained to fly powered aircraft. They're taught to use engines to control speed and altitude. Few have experience with genuine unpowered flight. Pearson did. He'd spent hundreds of hours flying sailplanes, landing on short fields, managing energy in the pattern. Those skills were critical during Flight 143's descent. When the engines quit, Pearson immediately shifted to glider pilot mode. He calculated glide ratio, he planned his energy management, he used forward slip technique, a maneuver commercial pilots almost never use, to lose altitude without overshooting. The forward slip was critical. Flight 143 was high on approach. They had excess altitude with no engines to power a go-around. Pearson needed to dump altitude quickly without gaining speed. A forward slip does exactly that, creates drag, increases descent rate, maintains airspeed. It's a standard glider maneuver. It's almost never used in commercial jets. Pearson executed it perfectly, bringing a 132-ton aircraft down at an angle that would terrify most airline pilots. He held that slip until the last 500 feet, then leveled out for landing. Every aviation expert who analyzed the flight agrees, without Pearson's glider experience, Flight 143 probably crashes short of the runway. A typical airline pilot, trained exclusively on powered aircraft, likely misjudges the approach and either overshoots or comes up short. Pearson nailed it, not because he was lucky, because he was prepared in a way no one could have predicted would matter. It's the ultimate argument for diverse skills. The airline didn't hire Pearson because he flew gliders. They hired him because he was a competent commercial pilot. His glider expertise was a hobby, unrelated to his job, until the day it became the most important qualification he had.
The people at Gimli Airport that evening had no warning a 767 was about to land on their drag strip. The first indication was the sound, or rather, the lack of sound. Commercial jets are loud. Flight 143 was silent except for wind noise. Several people at the event later described it as surreal, watching a massive airliner descend without engine noise. Then, panic. When people realized the aircraft was actually landing on the runway, they scattered. Parents grabbed children, race crews abandoned their cars. Everyone ran. The two boys on bicycles who were riding on the closed section of the runway froze. They later said they couldn't understand what they were seeing. A giant plane landing here? Rick Dion, one of the race organizers, was standing near the threshold when Flight 143 touched down. He watched the left gear collapse, saw the sparks from the nacelle scraping the runway, and thought he was about to witness a catastrophic crash. Instead, the aircraft stopped. Passengers evacuated. Everyone survived. Dion and several other race crew members immediately ran to help. They assisted passengers off the slides, checked for injuries, and helped direct the evacuation. Several families who were picnicking adjacent to the runway reported thinking they were about to die. One father grabbed his two young children and ran, convinced the aircraft was going to overshoot the runway and crash into them. The Winnipeg Sports Car Club's event was obviously canceled. The runway was closed for investigation, but the racing community became part of the Gimli Glider legend, the people who watched one of aviation's most remarkable landings from 200 feet away. CGAUN, the Boeing 767 that became the Gimli Glider, was repaired and returned to service. The damage wasn't as severe as it looked. The left main landing gear needed to be replaced, the nose gear tires were blown, the left engine nacelle was ground down from runway contact and required extensive repairs, but the airframe was intact, the wings were fine, the fuselage had no structural damage. Boeing engineers inspected the aircraft and cleared it for repair. Within weeks, CGAUN was ferried to a maintenance facility, repaired, and returned to Air Canada's fleet. The aircraft flew for another 25 years. Pilots who flew CGAUN after 1983 reported it flew perfectly. There were no handling quirks, no weird vibrations. The repairs were so thorough that only people who knew the history could tell the aircraft had been in an incident. CGAUN became something of a legend in the aviation community. Pilots and crew requested to fly it. Passengers who knew the story specifically booked flights on the Gimli Glider. It was a survivor, an aircraft that had experienced the impossible and kept flying. In 2008, Air Canada retired the 767-200 series from service. CGAUN was flown to a scrapyard in Roswell, New Mexico, and dismantled. The nose section was preserved and is currently on display at the Winnipeg Aviation Museum. You can visit it. You can sit in the cockpit where Bob Pearson and Maurice Quintal flew a powerless airliner to a perfect landing. You can see the instrument panels, the controls, the seats. The museum has a plaque that reads, "The Gimli Glider, July 23, 1983, emergency landing with no engines. All 69 people survived." The Gimli Glider teaches us several critical lessons about aviation safety, human error, and the importance of diverse skills. Lesson 1. Redundancy isn't enough. The 767 had multiple fuel systems, backup pumps, and redundant gauges, but when the primary fuel quantity processor failed, the backup systems weren't sufficient. The manual calculation process was ambiguous and prone to error. Modern aircraft have even more redundancy, but the lesson remains: systems must be foolproof, not just redundant. Lesson 2. Transitions are dangerous. Canada's metric conversion was well-intentioned, but the transition period, where some systems used metric and some used imperial, created ambiguity. Anytime an industry transitions to new standards, procedures, or systems, errors spike. Clear communication and unambiguous procedures are critical. Lesson 3. Skills transfer unpredictably. Bob Pearson's glider experience saved 69 lives, but no one could have predicted it would matter. Organizations benefit from employees with diverse backgrounds and skills. You never know when someone's seemingly unrelated expertise becomes the critical factor. Lesson 4. Human error is inevitable. Multiple people made mistakes leading to Flight 143's fuel shortage. Ground crew, pilots, supervisors, all contributed. But human error is unavoidable. The goal isn't to eliminate error, impossible, but to design systems that catch errors before they become catastrophic. Lesson 5. Training matters. Pearson and Quintal performed flawlessly under pressure. Their training kicked in. They followed procedures, communicated clearly, and made correct decisions under extreme stress. When systems fail, human skill is the last line of defense. The Gimli Glider isn't just a story about a lucky landing. It's a case study in how systems fail, how errors compound, and how skilled individuals can overcome impossible situations. It's also a reminder that sometimes the most important qualification you have isn't on your resume, it's the hobby you do in your free time, the skill you developed for fun, the experience that seems irrelevant until the day it saves 69 lives. In 2003, on the 20th anniversary of the incident, Air Canada organized a reunion at Gimli Airport. Captain Bob Pearson, now retired, attended. So did Maurice Quintal. Many of the passengers from Flight 143 showed up. Some of the drag racers who witnessed the landing came. Local residents, aviation enthusiasts, and media filled the small airport. They stood on the same runway where CG Gun had landed 20 years earlier. The runway is still there, still used occasionally for aviation events. The pavement has been repaired, but you can still see where the left nacelle scraped the concrete if you know where to look. Pearson gave a speech. He talked about the flight, the decisions, the landing. He credited his crew, the flight attendants, the air traffic controllers. He mentioned his glider training almost as an afterthought. Someone asked him what was going through his mind when both engines quit. Honestly, Pearson said, my first thought was, this can't be happening. My second thought was, okay, it's happening. Now what? That's the essence of crisis management. Accept reality, move forward, solve the problem. A passenger from Flight 143, a man who'd been traveling with his young daughter, approached Pearson after the speech. He shook the captain's hand and said simply, "Thank you. My daughter just graduated from university. She's getting married next year. None of that happens without you." Pearson didn't know how to respond. He'd spent 20 years being told he was a hero, but hearing it from someone whose child's entire life existed because of his actions, that hit differently. "I was just doing my job," Pearson said. "No," the man replied. "You did something no one else could have done, and I'll never forget it." In 2013, on the 30th anniversary, another reunion was held. Fewer people attended. Some had passed away, others were too elderly to travel. But the survivors who made it stood on that runway again, looking at the sky, remembering the day a 767 fell silently from the clouds and landed without engines. Bob Pearson is in his late 80s now. He still gives occasional interviews. He still downplays his role. He still insists he was just lucky. But everyone who knows aviation, everyone who understands the physics and the skill required, knows the truth. Bob Pearson didn't get lucky. He executed the single most impressive display of piloting skill in commercial aviation history. He glided a 132-ton aircraft 90 miles through the sky and put it down on a drag strip in front of families having a barbecue. He did it with no engines, failing hydraulics, and one collapsed landing gear. And all 69 people walked away. That's not luck. That's skill, preparation, and the kind of calm decision-making that defines the difference between disaster and survival. The Gimli Glider flew again. The passengers went home. Bob Pearson returned to flying. But on that runway in Manitoba, at 9:08 p.m. on July 23, 1983, something impossible happened. And 69 people are alive today because one pilot happened to fly gliders on weekends.